Right here is a 2001 Toyota Tacoma, which falls within the first generation, 95 to 04. And in this video, we're going to talk about the top 5 problems that we found with this. Our first problem is going to be mass airflow sensors. Some of these vehicles didn't come with one from the factory. They have a map sensor and separate air temperature sensor. However, this particular one and many other ones do have it, where the job of this mass airflow sensor is to not only sense the temperature, so it takes place of that temperature sensor, but it also measures how much air flows through. Now with mileage, and especially if you tend to ignore the air filter often and you don't change it, they can get gummed up, dirty. Now, unfortunately, these don't respond very well to cleaning just because of the way they're designed. So when you have a check engine light or the engine isn't running like it should, maybe it doesn't even start in more severe cases, you're going to want to check the mass airflow sensor. So you're going to have to end up replacing it with a new part, which, by the way, we sell at oneauto.com, and that should fix your issue. Our second problem is going to be related to the coolant temperature sensor. When this becomes an issue is usually when the truck gets higher in mileage and they just go bad because of all the heat cycles and they just get old. You'll see a check engine light illuminate on the dash. If you scan it, you'll see a code, most commonly anywhere that ranges between P0115 and P0119. Now, yes, there are other codes that can be triggered, but these are the more common ones. Honestly, in the end, it comes down to a bad ECT sensor, engine coolant temperature sensor. And the reason you don't want to ignore this is because the sensor doesn't just tell the gauge where to point so that you know how hot the engine is. It also tells the computer. The computer adjusts fuel and timing in this case to properly run. If it has the wrong reading from the temperature, it cannot adjust properly, and therefore it will either run very rough or too rich, too much fuel, too lean. None of those are good, can be dangerous for the engine, so you definitely want to address that issue as soon as possible. Our third problem is going to be the starter on these trucks. And if you know, you know. Toyota starters, right around 200,000 miles, give or take a little bit, it's probably going to need a starter. Usually when you have a problem with one of these starters, it will take a lot of tries before you can start the engine, if it even starts at all. And what it comes down to is either a starter solenoid in there that goes bad, or the starter motor itself, it just can't spin anymore. And they are easily accessible from underneath. In the end, you'll have to just replace the starter with a brand new one, which we do sell at oneauto.com. Our fourth problem is going to be the lower ball joints. And once again, if you know, you know, these tend to fail often, especially once these vehicles get higher in mileage, the ball joints wear out, and they have a lot of load on them. Not only are they carrying the entire suspension knuckle assembly at the wheel and everything, but they also have the tie rod connected to them, so they actually handle some of the steering as well. So once they start wearing out, don't wait for them to actually go bad. If you think they are getting the boot torn a little bit, if the grease is leaking out, or if they start developing a little bit of play, don't ignore it, change it right away, because if it breaks, which happens often unfortunately, the ball pops out of the socket, and when you hit a bump, the entire wheel assembly just goes right into the fender and basically rips off of the lower control arm. That is a major safety issue, so you want to keep an eye out on these lower ball joints. Keep them greased up if they're greasable, or replace them if they need to be replaced. Our fifth problem is going to be the throttle position sensor. However, it's not always the throttle position sensor's fault. Let me explain. It's mounted on the back of the throttle body here, and right where the throttle plate opens and closes, it needs to read how far it opens and closes. Well, because there's a breather tube here, a lot of times, over time, it gets built up with oil, carbon buildup, it just gets gunked up, and it cannot move properly. Maybe the throttle plate gets stuck, maybe the sensor gets a bunch of junk in there and can't read accordingly to how it is operated. Also, it could be out of adjustment. It does have an adjustment, so if it gets bumped, whether you're working on it or whatever the case may be, you want to take the throttle body off, give it a good cleaning, and inspect that sensor. When you have throttle position sensor issues, a lot of times it also comes with a lack of power or performance, but you want to make sure that it doesn't come from a loose throttle cable. This is cable operated, and it does have an adjustment right here. To adjust it, all you need is two 12mm wrenches, and you want to pull this cable nice and tight so that it doesn't have any slack in it. If it has slack, your throttle pedal will not be operating the full range of that throttle cable, meaning if you need full power, and let's say you floor it, well, it's really not going to be floored. It's going to be maybe 70% of the way, which means there is power that is not being used. Now, you don't want to over-tighten it, because if you over-tighten it, it's constantly pulling on that throttle, and it's going to not even run right, or it's not going to idle properly. But at this point, if I move it around, it's going to have a little bit of up and down movement. That's normal. But if I pull on it, which simulates stepping on that gas pedal, it is not going to move around with a lot of slack. This is perfect.